Okay, this is page 82, part 1. Let's call it part 1 of inverse functions, introduction. So how are inverse functions useful for solving problems? So an inverse function undoes, let's say undoes the actions of another function. This denoted as the inverse of f of x. Right. So we're going to use an example here. F of x equals 2x plus 1. So what essentially happens is you're going to just swap values. You're going to swap the x and y. So they're really just going to switch. And you'll see what I mean once we get to some examples here. So you know how to go from x to f of x. Now you have to go from f of x to x. Now, well, let's look at an example of this. So we're going to take this function right here. Let's use f of x equals 2x plus 1. So, and here's my steps here. So step 1, we're going to swap x and y. Step 2, solve for y. Step 3, replace y with the inverse notation f negative 1x, which means the inverse of f of x. Okay, so step 1, let's look at our function here. So we have f of x equals to 2x plus 1. Okay, so I'm going to make this y because we know f of x is equal to y. Okay, so in step 1, we're going to swap. We're going to swap x and y. So we're going to switch these two. So we got 2y, and this is going to be x now, plus 1. So the next step, we're going to just solve for y. So this is why we did the literal equation. So you just got to get used to solving for many types of variables. So I'm going to have 2y is equal to, let's just say x minus 1. So I just flip these using the commutative property. Now I'm going to solve for y by taking a multiplicative inverse, and then y is equal to x minus 1 over 2. Now we're going to switch y now with the inverse now, because now this is actually our inverse of f of x, x minus 1 over 2. And I like the f of x on the other side, so I'm just going to kind of put the inverse on the other side here, x minus 1 over 2. And that's all you do to find the inverse. We're going to graph these later. On part 2, I want you to try to find the inverses of these before we actually start part 2. So find the inverse of those.